20 to 9 on a Tuesday morning, one man stood outside the village hall. By midday, there were 19 people behind him. A gazebo, a borrowed tea urn, and a 14-year-old selling places in the line. Not one of them knew what they were waiting for, and not one of them would leave. Welcome back to Little Mizzlewick. Today's story is 19 people queued. Nobody knew why.
20 to 9. There had been no rain for 11 days, and Little Mizzlewick had settled into discussing it with the steady dedication of people who had run out of other topics. Alfie Crane had a better view of it than most. His round took him past every garden in the village twice, once out and once back, and he could watch the whole thing going quietly, backwards. The green had gone the colour of a doormat. The verges crackled. June Marsh's onions were being kept alive by hand and by force of character. The hosepipe ban had gone up on the St Jude's board on the Friday in Nora Field's careful capitals, and 11 days on it was still the only thing on there. He came into the cobbled square at 20 to 9 with the second bag on his shoulder, and Mr Collins was standing outside the village hall. He was standing very straight, a little to the left of the doors, with his hands folded in front of him and a canvas bag at his feet. He had the look of a man who had been there a while and intended to be there a while longer. Alfie had known Mr Collins his whole life, had delivered him a decade of gas bills and one birthday card a year from Lyme Regis, and had never once seen him hurry. "Morning, Mr Collins." "Good morning, Alfie." That, by any reasonable measure, was where it should have ended. Alfie got 4 steps past him before the thought arrived. The village hall did not open at 20 to 9. The village hall opened when somebody had a reason to open it, and there was no reason on a Tuesday in August. There was no bring and buy, no talent night, no meeting anybody had put on the board, and Nora put everything on the board. He slowed. He half-turned. Mr Collins was looking pleasantly at the middle distance, in the manner of a man entirely at peace with his morning. Alfie did not ask. He thought about it afterwards a great deal, because a lot of things followed from it, and he could never find the moment where asking would have been natural. You did not walk up to a retired mathematics master and demand to know why he was standing outside a building. It would have been like asking somebody why they were carrying an umbrella. Either there was a reason, in which case it was theirs, or there was not, in which case pointing it out would be unkind. So Alfie said nothing and went on up Church Lane with the second bag, and that was the last moment in the day when the whole thing could have been stopped with one sentence. By the time he came back down the lane at 9, there were 2 of them. The second was Pippa Henderson, out from the bakery with her apron still on and a paper bag in her hand. She had positioned herself about a yard behind Mr Collins, not beside him, which Alfie noticed at the time without understanding what he was seeing. A yard behind a man is not standing near a man. A yard behind a man is a queue. "Morning, Pippa." "Morning." She lowered her voice. "Do you know what it's for?" Alfie looked at the back of Mr Collins's head. "No. Only I saw him from the window and I thought, he's been there 20 minutes. She shifted the paper bag to her other hand. "I've got until 9:30. "Right. If it's the flu clinic, they usually do it in the hall." "It's August. They do it earlier every year," said Pippa, with the certainty of someone who had heard this from a customer. Alfie carried on across the square. At the corner he glanced back, and a woman he did not immediately recognise had come out of the lane and stopped behind Pippa, close enough to be part of it. 3 people, one behind the other, on the cobbles, outside a locked building. He had one more street to do before the sorting office wanted him back, and he did it quickly, which he later regretted, because if he had taken his time, the whole thing might have got no further than 5. At 20 past 9, he came back through the square, and there were 9. The line had bent itself around the corner of the hall to sit in the shade, which suggested a certain expectation of duration. Somebody had brought a folding chair. Leo Turnbull was walking slowly along the length of it with his phone held out, saying, "So nobody actually knows," in a voice that carried. And Sarah Logan was standing at the shop door with the telephone pressed to her ear and her free hand raised, asking somebody at the other end whether there had been a notice. Nora Field arrived at the notice board with her key, looked at the queue, looked at the board, and then looked at the queue again with the expression of a woman whose filing system had been contradicted by events. "There's nothing on here," she said. "That's what I said," said Sarah with her hand over the telephone. "There's nothing on here at all. There has been nothing on here but the ban since Friday week." "Then what are they queuing for?" Nora considered the question with her usual care. "Well," she said, "something, presumably." How a queue forms. Alfie got the second half of his round done in a state of mild distraction, which is how he came to put a water bill through the wrong Henderson. By 10:30, the square had stopped being a place people crossed and had become a place people were. The queue had reached the corner of the lane. It had a shape now, a definite one, with a head and a tail and a kink in the middle where it went round the postbox, and it had acquired the quality that queues acquire after an hour, which is that leaving it costs more than staying in it. Alfie came at it from the top of the square and worked his way down, delivering as he went, which meant he heard the whole thing in sections. At the tail end, 2 women from the new houses had it on good authority that it was the mobile bank. 10 places up, a man was explaining that it could not be the mobile bank, because the mobile bank came on a Thursday and parked by the pub, and that in his opinion it was a housing survey, and that they would want to know how many bedrooms you had, and that he did not intend to tell them. In the middle, somebody had heard vaccinations. Above that, somebody had heard the council. And near the front, standing with her back very straight and her handbag held in both hands, Nora Field was telling anybody within reach about 1976. 2 standpipes, she said, right there, where the cobbles change colour. You queued with a bucket and you took what you were given, and there was a man from the water board who was extremely rude about my mother's fuchsias. They wouldn't do standpipes over a hosepipe ban, said Pippa. They put the ban up first in 1976 as well, dear, said Nora. Nobody announced the standpipes. They simply arrived, and then everybody knew. Pippa looked at the locked doors of the village hall for slightly longer than she had intended to. Alfie delivered a parcel to the shop and found Sarah Logan mid-flow at the counter with a queue of her own that consisted of 1 person who had come in for milk and was now trapped. "I've rung the council," Sarah said, "and they've got no record of anything at the hall today, which is exactly what they said about the hedgehog crossing, so I'm not taking that as final. I've rung the surgery, and they said they'd ring me back, which means no. And I've rung the parish clerk twice, and she's on holiday in Wales." "So nobody knows," said Alfie. "Nobody official knows." Sarah leaned across the counter. "But I'll tell you what I think. I think it's a consultation." "On what?" "That's the thing about consultations," said Sarah darkly. "They don't tell you until you're in the room." Outside, Major Robert Burns had arrived in the square and stopped dead in the middle of it. Alfie watched him from the shop doorway and saw the exact moment the Major stopped seeing a crowd and started seeing a formation. He walked the length of the queue once, from the tail to the head, without speaking to anybody. Then he walked it back again. Then he stood at the head of it, some 6 feet from Mr. Collins, and put his hands behind his back. "This," he announced, "is a distribution point." Nobody argued, because nobody had anything better. Consider the evidence. The Major addressed the queue as a whole, which by now was 13 strong and had the grateful attention of people who had been standing about for 2 hours with no information. The hall is the largest indoor space in the village. It has a serving hatch and its own water. It is the natural site for any organised issue of supplies. Furthermore, the doors are locked. "That's evidence against, surely," said Ben Carter, who had wandered up from the lane with a mug in his hand and no clear intention of joining. On the contrary, it is precisely what you would expect. They will not open until the officer in charge arrives with the key. Or it's locked because nothing's happening. The Major turned and gave him a look of enormous patience. "Carter," he said, "in 1976, the standpipes did not appear until 11. Nora nodded from her place in the line. "That's true, actually. 11, said the Major, checking a wristwatch he had worn since the army and had never once found reason to doubt. "Which is in 8 minutes. 13 people in a queue shifted their weight and looked at the doors. Alfie went back to his round. He had a whole terrace to do on the far side of the church, and he did it slowly, and when he came back into the square at 11:10, the doors were still shut. The Major was still there, and the queue was 18, not counting Mr. Collins, who was not queuing. Nobody had left. That was the part Alfie could not get over afterwards. In 2.5 hours, with no information of any kind, not one person had decided that, whatever it was not worth this. The answer: rejected. Eleanor Vance came into the square at 11:15 with her crossword folded under her arm. She did not join the queue. Alfie noted that, and it seemed important without being able to say why. She stood at the edge of the cobbles and read the queue the way she read everything, from one end to the other. And then she walked up the outside of it to the front, said something to Mr. Collins that Alfie could not hear, listened to his answer, said something else, listened again, and then came back down the queue at an unhurried pace and stopped where Alfie was standing. "He is waiting for his lift," she said. Alfie looked at her. "He goes to his sister in Lyme Regis for a fortnight every summer," said Eleanor. "He is being collected from outside the hall, because outside the hall is where you stand to be collected, and he is being collected at 12:30. 12:30. 12:30. "Then why has he been standing there since 8:30? "Because he was ready," said Eleanor. "And he has never in his life arrived anywhere late, and he did not care to sit in the house with his coat on." Alfie turned this over. It fitted. It fitted so exactly and so completely that he could feel the whole morning collapsing quietly inwards, the way a paper bag does when you take the shopping out of it. "So, there's nothing," he said. "There is a car coming at 12:30, said Eleanor, "and there are 18 people waiting for it." She raised her voice then, only slightly, in the way that a woman who has spent 30 years in a classroom can raise her voice only slightly and be heard by everybody. "Mr. Collins is waiting for a lift to Lyme Regis," she said. "That is the whole of it. There is nothing being distributed, nothing being consulted on, and nothing coming from the council. You are all queuing behind a punctual man with a bag." Alfie had been present for a number of village occasions. He had seen the pitch go crooked, and he had spent a night on Sarah's hedgehog patrol with a torch and a clipboard and seen no hedgehogs whatsoever. He had never seen anything quite like the silence that followed. It lasted about 4 seconds. "Well, he'd say that," said somebody near the back. There was a general murmur of agreement, and the queue, which had briefly wobbled, set itself firm again like a jelly going back in the fridge. "He would say what?" said Eleanor. "They're not supposed to tell you in advance," said the man who had been worried about the bedrooms. "That's the whole point. If they announce it, everybody turns up." "Everybody has turned up, because we worked it out," he said, with quiet pride. Sarah Logan had come out of the shop and was nodding hard. "And it doesn't explain the timing. If the car comes at 12:30, why has he been there since 8:30? "Because he is always early," said Eleanor. "Nobody," said Sarah, "is 4 hours early for a lift." And there it was. Alfie saw the whole village take the correct answer, examine it carefully, find it insufficiently interesting, and put it back. The Major had been listening with his chin lifted. "It is possible," he said, "that Collins is not fully aware of what he is standing in. He arrived first, others arrived after. The purpose may have attached itself to the location without his knowledge." That is the single most accurate thing anybody has said all morning, said Eleanor, and you have drawn precisely the wrong conclusion from it. She went and sat on the bench under the oak, from which she had a clear view of the noticeboard and everybody standing near it, and opened her crossword and did not speak again for some time. Leo, who had filmed the entire exchange, lowered his phone with the expression of a young man who has just watched a story refuse to end. That was amazing, he said. Should I put it up? Put what up? Said Alfie. That's the thing, said Leo. I don't know yet. Operation Orderly Line. At 11:30, the Major took command, on the grounds that somebody had to. 18 persons, he said, in the open, in this heat, with no shade beyond the corner and no confirmed time frame. This is now a welfare matter. What followed was, Alfie had to admit, extremely efficient. Chairs were fetched, though not from the hall, which was still locked, so they came from the church porch and from Nora's front room and from the back of Tom Armitage's truck. A gazebo appeared from somewhere and was put up over the middle third of the queue at an angle that satisfied nobody. Pippa went back to the bakery and returned with a tray of yesterday's buns at half price. Sold out in 90 seconds, and went back for more. Reverend B. Hemlock came across from St. Jude's, took in the gazebo, the chairs, the queue, and the Major, and offered the church hall urn. That's very kind, Vicar, said the Major. That would be a considerable help. I'll want it back, said B. And I'd like it on the record that I have no idea what any of you are doing. The urn came out on a trolley. Tea began. And at that point, the queue stopped being a thing people were enduring and became a thing people were enjoying, which Alfie recognised as the moment it became impossible to shift. Elsie Harper came through the square at 20 to 12, on her way to somewhere else entirely, and stopped at the tail of the queue with her mouth open. She stood there for perhaps 15 seconds, taking it in. Alfie, who was standing across the square with the last of the second bag, watched her face go through several distinct stages and arrive somewhere he did not like the look of at all. Then she went into the shop, came out with a raffle book, and started at the back. Number 31, she said, tearing a ticket. Hold on to that. Number 32. Don't lose it. They're not replaceable. What's this for? Said one of the women from the new houses. Order of service, said Elsie. So there's no dispute later. She worked her way up the line, and by the time she reached the front, she had numbered all 18, and had begun to broker the numbers between them, on the principle that a person at 15 who was in no hurry and a person at 4 who had a bus to catch were both being poorly served by the present arrangement. The rate she got for number 6 was, Alfie learned later, £2.50 and a lift into town on Thursday. June Marsh came down the lane from the allotments at 10 to 12 with soil on her hands, looked at the queue and joined it, which made it 19. June, said Eleanor from the bench, without lifting her eyes from the crossword. You know what this is. I know what you say it is. You have known Mr. Collins for 40 years. And I know he's an early riser, said June. And I know a queue when I see one. And I am not going to be the only person in this village who wasn't in it. Then June turned round, looked at the raffle ticket in the hand of the woman behind her, and asked what that was. The explanation took some time. When it was finished, June Marsh confiscated the raffle book on the grounds that no committee had authorised the numbering of anybody, and Elsie Harper argued with some force that she had never claimed a committee had, and that the tickets were a private arrangement between consenting parties. She was still holding £2.50 at the end of it. Alfie noticed that nobody asked for it back. Cinders arrived shortly afterwards, walked the entire length of the queue with his tail up, sat down in the shade of the third chair, and washed himself. The doors of the village hall stayed shut. By noon, this had stopped being a problem, and had become the strongest evidence anybody had. 12:30. By 12:10, Alfie had finished his round, and there was no professional reason for him to be in the square at all. He went back anyway. He told himself it was for the bun. The queue had settled into the long middle stretch that all queues reach, where nobody expects anything imminently, and nobody will leave. People had swapped places to sit down. 2 of the chairs had been turned to face each other. Somebody had started a conversation about a boundary hedge that had been waiting 11 years for the right occasion. The Major had established himself by the doors in what he described as a holding pattern. At 12:20 he turned round. "Crane, Major, you are the only person here in an official capacity." Alfie looked down at himself. He was wearing shorts and carrying an empty bag. "I've finished," he said. "You are still in uniform. Nobody will take it amiss from you." The Major lowered his voice, which did not reduce its carrying power. "Go to the front and ask him what he is waiting for." And this is the part Alfie told badly for years afterwards, because there was no good way to tell it. He walked up the outside of the queue. 19 people watched him do it. He was aware of Leo falling into step behind him with the phone up, and of the particular quality of quiet that comes over people who are about to be told something. Mr. Collins was standing where he had been standing at 9:20, a little to the left of the doors, hands folded, bag at his feet. Mr. Collins. Alfie. And Alfie, who had walked 11 miles that morning, who had put a water bill through the wrong Henderson, who had been sent up the length of a queue of 19 with one straightforward question sitting in his mouth ready to go, heard himself say, "Are you all right for a chair?" "I've been sitting down for 11 years, said Mr. Collins. "I'm quite content." "Right. Warm again." "It is." Alfie came back down the line. 19 faces turned to him. "Well," said the Major. "He's all right for a chair," said Alfie. There was a pause of real length. "Good," said the Major, and wrote something on the back of a folded scorecard. At 12:30, Gavin Price's van came into the square, went round the outside of the queue, and stopped level with the hall doors. Mr. Collins bent and picked up his canvas bag. "That's me," he said, to nobody in particular, and got in. 19 people watched the front of the queue drive away. The van got about 50 yards to where the cobbles give out onto Church Lane. Then the brake lights came on. Then it reversed, slowly and accurately. All the way back, the window came down. Gavin leaned out. "What's it for?" Nobody answered. He waited, with his arm on the sill, in the manner of a man who has all afternoon and has asked a simple question. Somewhere in the middle of the queue, there was a shifting sound. "Right," said Gavin, and put the window up, and drove Mr. Collins to Lyme Regis. Sarah Logan spoke first. So he wasn't in the queue at all. "He was the queue," said Eleanor from the bench, without looking up. Nobody left. Pippa Henderson was now at the front, holding a tray, and had the good grace to look uncomfortable about it. Closing time. The queue broke up at about 1:20. Not because anything happened, but because Pippa ran out of buns, and it turns out that is what a queue is really made of. The shepherd's crook that evening was the fullest Alfie had seen it since the cricket. Arthur Grimshaw had propped the door and was working the pumps with the expression of a man who had heard the whole story 11 times and was now hearing it a 12th with variations. The variations were the good part. By 7 o'clock, the queue had been 25. By 8, it had been in place since 8 in the morning, which was half an hour before Mr. Collins had left his house. Somebody claimed a man had come over from Upper Mizzlewick to see it, and somebody else said that if he had joined the back. And this got the biggest laugh of the night. Leo had put the video up at 4, and it had done 11,000 views by closing. He had called it "Nobody in this village will ask a question." Arthur watched about 40 seconds of it over the bar, handed the phone back, and said it was accurate, which, from Arthur, was a review. "What I cannot get past," said the Major from his corner, "is that Mrs. Vance told us at 11:15 and we did not believe her." "You did not believe me," said Eleanor. "I did not believe you," the Major agreed. It was an unsatisfactory answer. It was the correct one. Those are not always the same, Mrs. Vance, and I stand by it. Sarah Logan, 2 stools along, was already 3/4 of the way to a new position, which was that a queue of that size ought not to go to waste, and that if the village was going to stand outside the hall on a Tuesday morning regardless, somebody may as well open it and give them something to stand there for, coffee possibly, a table for the school-run mothers, somewhere to put the bring and buy. Nora Field said that would need to go on the board. Sarah said she would draft it. Nora said she would need it in writing by Friday and in ink. At about 9:30, somebody proposed ringing Mr. Collins in Lyme Regis and putting it to him directly. Nobody had the number. Nora Field, who had the sister's address in her head from 30 years behind a post office counter, declined to give it out and said that a man on his holidays was entitled to his holidays. He'd only tell us it was a lift, said Sarah. He would, said Nora, and you would not believe him, and it would cost you the price of the call. Alfie got up to go at about 10. Arthur was drying a glass at the far end, listening to the 13th version of it, with no expression at all. 19 of them, Arthur said as Alfie passed. Out there in that heat, 4 hours, and the only one who knew what he was doing was the one at the front. He held the glass up to the light and looked at it and put it on the shelf. He's in Lyme Regis, he said. Alfie walked home the long way, past the hall. The chairs had gone back to the church porch. The gazebo was down. The cobbles held the shape of it, if you knew where to look, in the way a lawn holds the shape of a marquee for a week after. He thought about 20 to 9 and the 4 steps and the sentence he had not said. In a fortnight, Gavin's van would come back up Church Lane and into the square and stop level with the hall doors, and Mr. Collins would get out with his bag and stand for a moment while he found his key. And Alfie was as near to certain as he had ever been, about anything, that by the time the old man had it in his hand, there would be somebody standing behind him.
The number goes up every time the story is told. By Christmas, it will have been 40 of them, out there in the heat all day, and somebody will swear a man came over from Upper Mizzlewick to see it. Thank you for queuing with us. If you have ever joined a line without knowing what it was for, the comments are open. A Little Mizzlewick story from Once Otherwhere, where small stories have big hearts.